In a world obsessed with harmony, there's a quiet kind of suffering that almost no one talks about, the pain of being liked by everyone but known by no one. It begins innocently. You learn early that being good keeps you safe. That the smile is your shield, the apology your passport to belonging. You master the art of softening your edges so no one ever feels uncomfortable around you. You become the one everyone depends on. The friend who listens, the coworker who stays late, the child who never complains. You build your worth on the gratitude in their eyes. And for a while it works. You are loved, or at least it looks that way. But then the silence arrives. After every gathering, after every, "Sure, I don't mind," there's that moment when you're alone, staring at the ceiling. The world grows quiet and suddenly, you can hear the faint echo of a question you've been avoiding. Who am I when no one needs me? It's a question that burns, because you realize you've built an entire identity out of being acceptable. Every version of you was sculpted to fit the room you were in. Every smile, every nod, every carefully chosen word was a small act of self-erasure disguised as kindness. We live in a culture that glorifies likability. We are told that being easygoing makes us evolved, that compromise is the mark of maturity, that silence keeps the peace. But no one tells you that peace bought with self-abandonment is not peace at all. It's quiet suffocation. We confuse being liked with being loved, and being accepted with being seen. Yet they are not the same. Being liked depends on performance. Being loved requires truth. And the truth is rarely convenient. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to meet the expectations of society. It's the part of us that smiles when we want to scream, that nods in agreement while a deeper voice whispers, "This isn't me." The persona isn't evil, it's necessary. It allows us to function, to connect, to survive in a world that rewards conformity. But when the mask becomes fused to the face, when you forget it's a role, you lose the very thing it was meant to protect, your authentic self. You start to feel the cracks first in subtle ways. You overcommit. You agree to things that drain you. You say yes when your whole body wants to say no. You feel invisible in rooms where everyone praises you. You resent the people you serve but can't stop serving them because their comfort has become your currency. You tell yourself you're being kind, but deep down, you know it's fear of rejection, of conflict, of being called selfish. So you give and give, hoping that one day, someone will notice the sacrifice and hand you back the love you've been earning. But no one does. Because they're not taking from you, you're the one offering pieces of yourself unasked. It's a strange paradox. You spend your life trying to be good enough for everyone else, and in doing so, you become a stranger to yourself. You mistake approval for purpose and validation for intimacy. The applause feels good, but it doesn't fill the hollow inside. You begin to realize that the more you please others, the less you feel alive. Every yes becomes a small betrayal. Every smile that hides your truth becomes a quiet wound. Until one day, you wake up and can't remember what your own yes sounds like. The one that comes from truth, not obligation. People-pleasing is not kindness. It's self-protection. It's a defense mechanism dressed in compassion. You're not doing it because you want to make others happy. You're doing it because somewhere deep inside, you fear that if you stop, love will vanish. That if you ever disappoint someone, they'll leave, and you'll have to face the unbearable silence of your own company. So you fill that silence with service, with agreement, with compliance. And for a while, it feels noble. But over time, the weight grows unbearable. Because what you're really carrying is the cost of never being real. Imagine standing in a room surrounded by people who adore you, and realizing none of them actually know you. They love the version you perform, the agreeable mask you crafted. But if you were to take it off, if you were to say what you truly think, what you truly feel, would they still stay? That question haunts the people-pleaser. It's why you keep pretending. Because losing others feels terrifying. But what if the real loss isn't losing them, it's losing yourself a little more each time you stay silent? We are taught to see conflict as danger. But the truth is, conflict is often the birthplace of authenticity. When you suppress what you believe to avoid discomfort, you don't create peace. You create distance, first from yourself, then from everyone else. Because connection built on pretense cannot last. True belonging requires courage. The courage to be misunderstood, disliked, even rejected for the sake of truth. And maybe that's what meeting yourself really means. Not becoming someone new, but finally removing the mask you thought you needed to survive. It's terrifying, but beneath that fear is freedom. Because for the first time, you're not performing. You're simply being. You can only meet your real self in the silence that follows no. People-pleasing doesn't begin as a moral flaw, it begins as a survival mechanism. Somewhere in childhood, you learned that safety was conditional. Maybe it was a parent whose love depended on your compliance. Maybe it was the quiet tension of a household where anger erupted without warning, and the only way to stay safe was to anticipate everyone else's moods. Maybe it was teachers who praised you when you obeyed, or friends who withdrew when you disagreed. You absorbed the lesson quickly. Being agreeable keeps you loved, and love keeps you alive. So you built an invisible contract with the world. I will keep you comfortable, and in return, you won't leave me. But that contract came with a hidden cost. To honor it, you had to start disappearing. Bit by bit, you dimmed your emotions, trimmed your opinions, softened your truth. You learned to scan faces for disapproval before speaking. You became fluent in the unspoken language of other people's needs. Over time, your emotional radar sharpened. You could feel tension before it appeared, guilt before it was assigned. You became a caretaker not out of generosity, but out of fear. Psychologists call this fawning, a trauma response as instinctive as fight, flight, or freeze. It's the reflex to please in order to prevent conflict or rejection. The child who once survived by appeasing grows into an adult who cannot stop apologizing for existing. You tell yourself it's empathy, and in a way it is. But it's empathy without boundaries, compassion turned into self-erasure. You have learned to mistake submission for connection. Eric Fromm wrote that modern humans are terrified of freedom because with freedom comes responsibility. When you live for approval, you are spared from the burden of choice. You don't have to decide who you are or what you want. Others decide for you, and you just follow. It feels safe. But it's a counterfeit safety, a comfortable prison made of politeness. Inside it, your authentic self suffocates quietly. Nietzsche once said, "Become who you are." It sounds simple, but for the people-pleaser, it feels almost impossible. How can you become who you are when every instinct tells you to become who they need you to be? You've practiced disappearing for so long that visibility feels dangerous. You equate honesty with loss, boundaries with cruelty, and authenticity with isolation. The tragic irony is that in your effort to be loved, you abandon the only version of yourself that can actually receive love. Viktor Frankl spoke of the space between stimulus and response, the sacred pause where freedom lives. For the people-pleaser, that space is often filled with anxiety. When someone frowns, when voices rise, when silence lingers, your nervous system rushes to close the gap. You want to fix it, to smooth it over, to make everything okay. Because if you can keep everyone calm, you can keep yourself safe. But that's the illusion. Your safety has never depended on their comfort. It depends on your truth. There's a quiet grief that comes with realizing how much of your life has been spent in performance. You replay moments in your head, times you said, "It's fine," when it wasn't, times you laughed when you wanted to cry, times you agreed just to avoid the heaviness of disagreement. You realize how often you've mistaken exhaustion for peace, numbness for contentment. You wonder who you might have been if you hadn't been so busy being agreeable. Carl Jung described the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress to remain acceptable. For the people-pleaser, the shadow contains anger, desire, selfishness, honesty, everything you were told made you unlovable. You locked them away, believing they would destroy your relationships. But in truth, they were the missing colors of your soul. Without them, you become a grayscale version of yourself, polite, predictable, and hollow. The journey toward wholeness begins when you dare to meet that shadow, when you realize that your suppressed ugliness is simply your unexpressed humanity. There's also a deep loneliness in being everyone's comfort. People come to you with their burdens, their chaos, their needs. You carry them all, thinking it makes you good. But they rarely ask about your pain, because you've trained them not to. You've taught the world that you don't need care, only purpose. that you exist to make others feel better. You mistake being needed for being loved. But they are not the same. Being needed ties your worth to your usefulness. Being loved sees you even when you have nothing to offer. Sometimes, your body begins to rebel before your mind catches up. You feel it in your exhaustion, your headaches, your tight chest. The quiet resentment that builds when you say yes again. The way you fantasize about disappearing, not dying, just escaping, vanishing into silence where no one expects anything. That's your soul begging for boundaries, pleading for space to breathe. It's not selfishness, it's self-preservation. The drive to please is not about kindness. It's about control. Not control over others, but over uncertainty. You learn that keeping everyone happy reduces the risk of chaos. But real life is chaotic, and trying to manage everyone's emotions only deepens your anxiety. You cannot control how others perceive you, no matter how perfect you are. And the moment you realize that, something inside you breaks, but what breaks is the illusion, not you. In the quiet aftermath of that realization, a new kind of honesty emerges. You start to notice how you shrink in certain rooms, how your voice changes depending on who's listening. You catch yourself smiling out of habit, apologizing reflexively. And then, for the first time, you stop. You watch the discomfort rise like a wave. You don't fix it. You just feel it. That's the beginning of awakening, the moment when your awareness becomes stronger than your conditioning. You start to see that people-pleasing isn't love, it's self-abandonment disguised as virtue. You start to see that your gentleness is beautiful only when it's chosen freely, not when it's extracted through fear. You start to see that the approval you chase is hollow, because it's given to the mask, not to you. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. You think they love you for your kindness. But they love the mask you wear, and every mask costs a piece of your soul. There comes a moment, sometimes quiet, sometimes catastrophic, when the performance begins to fall apart. It might start with something small. You decline an invitation, you say no to a request you'd normally accept, you tell the truth instead of what's expected. And for a split second, your body floods with panic. You can feel it, the tightening in your chest, the racing thoughts that whisper, you've done something wrong. This is the echo of old conditioning. The guilt feels unbearable, because for so long, you've equated boundaries with betrayal. But then something unexpected happens. Nothing collapses. The world doesn't end. Maybe someone frowns, maybe someone pulls away, but the ground beneath you holds steady. In that stillness, you feel something you haven't felt in years. Space. The air feels different. The silence doesn't crush you, it liberates you. That's the first taste of freedom, fragile, trembling, but unmistakable. This is the breaking point every recovering people-pleaser reaches, the collision between fear and truth. The part of you that's been running from disapproval meets the part that longs to be real. They face each other eye to eye. It's not a peaceful meeting. It's raw, chaotic, emotional. You may cry. You may rage. You may feel lost. Because every false version of yourself begins to crumble, and you can't yet see what will rise in its place. You begin to realize that saying no is not cruelty, it's clarity. That love built on compliance isn't love, it's control. That being authentic doesn't mean you'll always be liked, but it guarantees that whoever stays, stays for the real you. The first few times you practice this, you'll tremble. You'll over-explain your decisions, apologize for your honesty, soften every truth to make it palatable. That's okay. Freedom takes practice. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of integrating the parts of yourself you once exiled. To individuate means to become whole, to stop identifying with the mask and start embodying the totality of who you are, the light and the shadow, the softness and the anger, the fear and the courage. For the people-pleaser, this means allowing yourself to disappoint others without collapsing. It means learning to tolerate the discomfort of disapproval while standing in your truth. There's a quiet strength that begins to form in that discomfort. It's not loud, not defiant, it's rooted. You start to realize that you don't owe anyone your constant availability. That love doesn't require self-sacrifice. That boundaries are not walls, they're the architecture of honesty. When you set them, you're not pushing people away, You're giving relationships a chance to be real. The transformation isn't glamorous. It's not a cinematic moment of triumph. It's subtle, 1,000 small acts of reclaiming yourself. You stop saying, "I'm fine," when you're not. You let your face show what your heart feels. You stop chasing after people who misunderstand you. You no longer explain your worth to those who question it. You start choosing rest over obligation, solitude over performance, truth over comfort. And each time you do, you feel a little more alive. At first, this new authenticity feels lonely. The people who benefited from your compliance may drift away. Some will call you selfish, distant, changed. And in a way, they're right, you are changed. You're no longer willing to shrink for their comfort. That's not cruelty, it's honesty. Not everyone is meant to walk beside the version of you that no longer performs. Let them go. Because the emptiness they leave behind becomes the space where your real life begins. You start to find peace in solitude, not the hollow loneliness you once feared, but a rich, quiet companionship with yourself. You realize that you can sit in a room alone and feel whole. You can breathe without needing permission. You can rest without needing validation. You can exist without earning your right to exist. That's the real freedom, to belong to yourself again. This is when you begin to understand that approval is a poor substitute for authenticity. Approval is conditional, authenticity is eternal. Approval comes and goes with the mood of others. Authenticity anchors you to your own soul. You realize that living truthfully may cost you relationships, but it will return your integrity. And that's a fair trade, because integrity is the foundation of peace. Philosophers have long said that truth liberates, but what they don't mention is how painful liberation can feel at first. Freedom requires grief, the grief of letting go of who you thought you had to be. You mourn the version of you who survived by being small. You grieve the years spent performing, the conversations where you swallowed your truth. And then, like all grief, it transforms. The tears that once came from fear begin to come from relief. Because now, finally, you can breathe without pretending. Nietzsche spoke of amor fati, the love of one's fate. To love even the painful parts of your journey, because they shaped your awakening. You begin to see that your people-pleasing wasn't a failure, it was a path. You did what you needed to survive. But survival is not the same as living. And now you are ready to live. You no longer seek peace by keeping others comfortable. You find peace by staying true, even when it costs you comfort. You learn that authenticity doesn't protect you from pain, it transforms pain into purpose. The sting of rejection becomes a reminder that you're no longer selling your soul for acceptance. The ache of solitude becomes the doorway to self-respect. The fear of being misunderstood fades when you realize that understanding yourself is enough. And then, one day, you wake up and realize that the world feels different. Not easier, but truer. Conversations are slower, quieter, more honest. The people around you may be fewer, but they are real. They don't love you because you please them. They love you because you are. You understand, finally, that love is not something you earn by disappearing. It's something that grows when you dare to be seen. You start to feel it in your bones, the subtle, sacred difference between being liked and being known. The world doesn't need another agreeable soul. It needs one person brave enough to be real. There's a calm that follows authenticity, not the kind of calm that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that arises when you stop running from yourself. For the first time, you no longer need to calculate your words or curate your emotions. You can simply exist, imperfectly and honestly. The silence that once terrified you now feels like home. You realize that solitude isn't a punishment for being difficult. It's the sanctuary where you finally meet the parts of yourself you abandoned trying to be easy. In the beginning, this peace feels foreign. You find yourself sitting in the quiet, waiting for the guilt to return, waiting for someone to need you again so you can prove your worth. But slowly the need fades. You start to notice that peace doesn't require applause. It doesn't require you to be anything other than present. The world around you hasn't changed much. People still have expectations, demands, projections, but your relationship with those expectations has. You no longer rush to meet them. You listen, you breathe, and then you decide from truth, not fear. That's the art of being real, learning to live without the performance. It's not rebellion, it's integrity. It's choosing depth over acceptance, alignment over approval. You begin to live from the inside out, rather than the outside in. Each decision, each word, each silence becomes an act of truth. You realize that authenticity isn't loud or dramatic, it's subtle, steady, grounded. It's the quiet confidence that says, "This is who I am, and that's enough." In modern life, this kind of authenticity feels almost radical. We live in a culture built on performance, curated feeds, polite small talk, endless comparison. Everyone is trying to be perceived the right way. But you've learned that perception is a hollow god to worship. The more you chase it, the emptier you feel. True fulfillment comes not from being admired, but from being understood, and that understanding begins with yourself. So you start practicing honesty in small ways. You tell a friend you can't make it tonight because you need rest. You admit that something hurt instead of pretending it didn't. You let silence exist in conversation instead of filling it with reassurance. You let others have their discomfort instead of rescuing them from it. And with each act of truth, your life begins to align with something sacred, reality itself. The strange thing is, the more real you become, the fewer people you impress, but the deeper your connections grow. You begin to attract those who recognize the quiet power of sincerity. These are the people who don't need your constant yes, who don't punish your honesty. With them, you don't perform, you simply are. And that's what love was supposed to feel like all along. Not the thrill of approval, but the ease of being seen. In this space, self-respect replaces validation. You no longer measure your value by how much you give or how easy you are to love. You start to see that the ones who truly matter will meet you in your truth, not in your performance. The ones who cannot, were never yours to keep. That realization hurts for a while, but beneath the pain is something unshakable. The understanding that you were never meant to belong to everyone. You were meant to belong to yourself. Now, when you look back at the version of you who tried so hard to please, you feel compassion, not shame. That person wasn't weak, they were surviving. They were doing their best to earn the love they didn't yet know they already deserved. You can thank them for getting you here. But you don't have to live as them anymore. You can finally let them rest. You begin to live slower. More intentionally. You choose conversations that nourish you, work that aligns with your soul, relationships that breathe instead of suffocate. You learn that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is disappoint someone, because it means you're no longer betraying yourself. You stop apologizing for your boundaries, your silence, your truth. You stop confusing selflessness with goodness. You realize that authenticity isn't about being right, it's about being real. And in the stillness of your own company, something extraordinary happens. You meet yourself, not the version shaped by expectations, not the one molded by fear, but the one that's been waiting patiently beneath it all. You hear your own voice clearly, maybe for the first time. It's gentle, steady, and wise. It doesn't need to prove or defend. It simply says, "I'm here. I've always been here." When you stop pleasing everyone, you begin to hear that voice again. The one that whispers in moments of stillness, reminding you that you are already enough. You realize that you never needed to earn love. You only needed to stop abandoning yourself to receive it. The end of pretending isn't loneliness. It's arrival. You are finally home, not in someone else's approval, not in the applause, but in the quiet truth of your own being. And in that truth, you finally meet the one person you've been trying to find your whole life, yourself.